The wind cut through the streets of New York like broken glass. It was late December, the kind of night where even the street lamps seemed to shiver. Pedestrians hurried past in thick coats, heads down, each step crunching against the thin layer of frost that had settled over the city. But not everyone had the luxury of warmth. At a lonely bus stop on the Upper East Side, Daniel Carter stood with his shoulders hunched, breath fogging in the icy air. 46 years old, once an architect with a future bright enough to blind, Daniel now looked like a shadow of that man. His hair, flecked with early gray, was unkempt. His suit was outdated, worn at the elbows, the tie frayed like old rope. In one hand he clutched a weather-beaten satchel, inside it the same resumes he had carried for months, hope written in ink that no one seemed willing to read. He told himself the bus would come. That tomorrow's interview might finally be the one. That maybe, just maybe, his luck would turn. Then she appeared. Sophia Reynolds, 38, CEO of a rapidly growing tech firm, stepped briskly out of a waiting black town car. She was all sharp lines and cold elegance, dark hair pinned back, heels clicking against the sidewalk, her silk blouse far too thin for the weather. She'd left her coat at the office in her rush, convinced her driver would take her all the way home. But when an emergency call pulled him away, she was left stranded in the freezing night. She looked out of place at the bus stop, like a diamond dropped in the gutter. Daniel noticed her shiver. She tried to hide it, pressing her arms against her body, but her teeth chattered. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. After all, what did he have to give? He was the one barely holding on. But something inside him stirred, something deeper than pride or comfort. Without hesitation, he slipped off his coat. It wasn't much, a faded gray wool jacket with thinning seams, but it was the only shield he had against the cold. "Here," he said quietly, holding it out. Sophia turned, startled. Her instinct was to refuse. This man looked tired, maybe even desperate. But there was a steadiness in his eyes, a kind of quiet dignity that made her pause. She accepted the coat reluctantly, slipping it over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, but so was something else, an unease she couldn't explain. Why would a stranger give up the little he had left for her? "Thank you," she murmured, studying him. "But, don't you need this more than I do?" Daniel shrugged, managing a faint smile. "Cold's temporary. Some things matter more." The simplicity of his words unsettled her. People in her world didn't speak like that. Her board members, her colleagues, her investors, they measured everything in terms of profit, percentages, risk. This man had given without calculation. They stood in silence for a while, waiting. The city roared faintly around them, distant sirens, honking taxis, the metallic grind of the subway beneath their feet. Sophia found herself stealing glances at him, curious. His hands were rough, nails unkempt. His satchel sagged with age. But there was something distinguished about the way he held himself, as if he had once been someone of consequence. Finally, the bus groaned up to the curb, brakes screeching against ice. People boarded quickly, but Daniel lingered, stepping aside to let her on first. "You're not coming?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not this one. Another will do." Something about the way he said it made her hesitate. She wanted to ask more, to know who this stranger was, but the driver's irritated bark forced her forward. She climbed aboard, slid into a seat by the window, and glanced back. Daniel stood alone under the flickering streetlight, his shirt collar pulled high against the cold, the satchel still clutched in his hands. He looked like a man left behind by the world. As the bus pulled away, Sophia pressed her palm against the window, a strange heaviness in her chest. She should have felt relieved to be warm again, safe, heading home to her glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. But she didn't. Instead, she felt haunted. When she finally arrived home, the city lights glittering beneath her like jewels, she slipped off the coat to hang it by her door. As she did, something fell from the pocket, a folded piece of paper, brittle at the edges. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it. Her breath caught. It wasn't just paper. It was a child's drawing. Crayon lines in bright colors, blue skies, a little house with a red roof, stick figures holding hands. Above them, a careful scrawl, "Me and Dad." Beneath it, another word, written shakily in a child's hand, "Ethan." Sophia stared, her pulse quickening. The edges of the drawing were smudged, worn as if carried for years. The kind of thing someone would never part with willingly. But why was it in the pocket of the man at the bus stop? Who was Ethan? And why did she suddenly feel like she had stumbled into the first chapter of someone else's story? Sophia sank onto her sofa, the drawing trembling in her hand. For the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her, a mix of curiosity, guilt, and a strange, unexplainable pull. She had to know more about this Daniel Carter. But as she gazed out at the cold night, she couldn't shake the feeling that finding out might change her life in ways she wasn't prepared for. If this story moved you, hit like and share it with someone who needs hope today. The next morning, Sophia Reynolds sat at the head of her long glass dining table, untouched coffee cooling by her hand. The child's drawing lay in front of her, its crayon lines almost mocking her orderly world. She couldn't stop staring at it. She had built her life on precision, control, strategy, every decision carefully calculated, every risk measured. Yet here she was, unable to stop thinking about a man she had met at a bus stop. A man who had handed her the coat off his back. A man who carried a child's drawing like it was the last piece of his soul. "Ethan," she whispered under her breath. The name felt heavy on her tongue, personal, almost sacred. She told herself to drop it. Return the coat, return the drawing, and be done with it. But another part of her, the part she hadn't listened to in years, insisted there was more. That Daniel Carter was not just some nameless drifter. And she needed to know why. By mid-morning, she was in her office on Madison Avenue, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of a city alive with ambition. Her assistant, Marianne, hovered at the door. "Should I confirm the investor meeting for 2 o'clock?" Marianne asked. Sophia barely heard her. She had pulled up her laptop and typed "Daniel Carter, New York architect" into the search bar. Results flooded the screen. At first, nothing seemed relevant, just a string of LinkedIn profiles, academic articles, random mentions. But then one link made her pause. A news headline from nearly a decade ago. "Promising architect Daniel Carter vanishes after Midtown tragedy." Her pulse quickened. She clicked. The article told a story she hadn't expected. Daniel Carter, a once celebrated architect, had been considered one of the city's brightest minds. His designs were bold, innovative, glass and steel masterpieces that had won him awards. But one winter, tragedy struck. A building he had helped design partially collapsed during renovations. No one had died, but injuries mounted, lawsuits followed, reputations crumbled. And Daniel Carter disappeared. Sophia sat back, stunned. She remembered vaguely hearing about that collapse years ago, when she was still climbing the corporate ladder. But she had never connected it to this man. The article ended with a photo, Daniel in his prime, suit crisp, hair neatly combed, a confident smile. The difference between the man she had seen at the bus stop and the man in the photo was jarring. What had happened to him in those lost years? By the time the investor meeting started, Sophia's mind was elsewhere. She went through the motions, nodding at projections and strategies, but her thoughts drifted again and again to Daniel Carter. When the meeting ended, Marianne pulled her aside. "You seem distracted," she said gently. "I met someone," Sophia blurted before she could stop herself. "A man. He used to be an architect." Marianne raised an eyebrow. And he gave me his coat last night," Sophia continued, almost defensively. "He has nothing, Marianne. Nothing. But he still gave it to me." Her assistant studied her, then lowered her voice. Sophia, men like that, you need to be careful. You don't know what he's been through. You don't know what he might be capable of. The warning stung. But Sophia couldn't let it go. She felt like she owed Daniel something, no, not just owed him. She felt connected. That evening, Sophia decided to return the coat. It was the logical excuse, she told herself. A simple gesture. Nothing more. She traced her way back to the same bus stop, coat folded over her arm, drawing tucked inside. The night was as cold as before, the streets lined with frost. She waited. Minutes ticked by, but no Daniel. She was about to give up when she spotted him across the street, leaving a corner deli with a paper cup of coffee in hand. "Daniel," she called out before she realized what she was doing. He stopped, startled, then smiled faintly when he recognized her. "Didn't expect to see you again." Sophia crossed the street, holding out the coat. "You left this." His expression softened. "Keep it. Looks better on you anyway." She shook her head, pressing it into his arms. "It's yours. And this too." She handed him the folded drawing. For the first time, his composure cracked. His hand trembled as he opened it, eyes locking on the childish scrawl of Ethan. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Sophia thought he might cry. "You looked at it," he said quietly. "Yes," she admitted. "Daniel, who's Ethan?" Silence hung heavy between them. He turned away, staring at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost broken. "My son," he said. "He's the reason I keep going." Sophia's breath caught. A son. The man she had written off as just another lost soul was carrying the weight of fatherhood, of love that refused to die even when everything else had crumbled. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why aren't you with him?" Daniel's shoulders slumped. "Because the world doesn't forgive mistakes. And I made one too big to fix." He started to walk away, but Sophia reached out, gripping his arm. "Then let me help." He turned, eyes hard now. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," she said, surprising herself with her own conviction. "But I want to." For a long moment, Daniel studied her, as if weighing whether to trust her with the truth. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Come to the shelter tomorrow night," he said. "If you still feel the same after that, maybe you'll understand." And just like that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing under the streetlight, coatless once more but burning with questions she couldn't ignore. The next day, when Sophia told her board of directors she planned to meet with Daniel Carter, the reaction was swift. "Absolutely not," one of them snapped. "That man is poison. His name is a liability. He'll drag you down. You're risking everything," another warned. "Your company, your reputation, your career. Stay away from him." But Sophia only tightened her grip on the table's edge. For once, the cold logic of business felt hollow. She thought of the coat. The drawing. The look in Daniel's eyes when he said, "My son." Her decision was made. That night, she arrived at the shelter Daniel had mentioned. The building was old, its bricks chipped, its windows glowing with tired light. She stepped inside, the air filled with the scent of cheap coffee and damp coats. And then she saw him. Daniel was sitting at a table surrounded by men who looked just as broken as him, yet he was the one speaking, encouraging, even smiling faintly. He wasn't just surviving here. He was leading. Sophia's heart pounded. Who exactly was this man she had stumbled across? Before she could move, Daniel looked up. His eyes locked on hers. A small smile crossed his face. And then, as if fate had been waiting for the moment, a voice rang out from behind her. "Sophia Reynolds. What are you doing here with him?" She froze. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. She turned slowly, and found herself staring at one of her own board members. Subscribe for more cinematic soul-touching style stories that will leave you breathless. The air in the shelter turned heavy the moment Sophia heard that voice. And there stood Richard Hale, one of the longest-serving members of her company's board. He was in his late 50s, sharp in a tailored overcoat, his silver hair neatly combed. He looked entirely out of place in the shelter's dim, worn walls, yet his presence was commanding, as if he had dragged the corporate world in here with him. "Sophia," Richard said, his tone clipped. "We need to talk." Daniel rose slowly from his seat, eyes narrowing. He didn't move toward Richard, but the tension in his jaw was unmistakable. "You know him?" Sophia asked, stunned. Richard's gaze cut to Daniel. His voice carried disdain. "Everyone in our field knows Daniel Carter. Or at least, they remember the scandal he left behind." Sophia's chest tightened. Scandal. The word echoed like a hammer in her mind. She wanted to protest, to defend Daniel, but how could she, when she still didn't know the whole story? Daniel's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "I don't need your pity, Richard. Or your judgment. I've paid enough for one lifetime." Richard ignored him, eyes fixed on Sophia. "Listen to me. Men like him don't deserve your sympathy. He'll drag you into his mess, and the company cannot afford that kind of risk. Walk away now, before you ruin everything you've built." For a moment, Sophia stood caught between two worlds, the gleaming boardrooms where she wielded power, and this shelter where a broken man carried the weight of something she couldn't yet understand. But before she could respond, Daniel gathered his satchel, muttered, "I don't belong here," and walked toward the back exit. "Daniel, wait!" Sophia called after him. But he was already gone, swallowed by the night. The following days were restless. Sophia tried to bury herself in work, but Daniel's absence gnawed at her. Every time she saw Richard in the office halls, she could feel his disapproval pressing down on her. Yet the drawing, the coat, the word Ethan, they kept pulling her back. By Friday evening, she couldn't resist. She returned to the shelter. Daniel wasn't there. Instead, a volunteer directed her to a nearby church basement where displaced men often gathered for meals. She found him seated alone at a long wooden table, sketching on the back of a paper placemat. Sophia hesitated before approaching. "You draw?" Daniel looked up, startled. His eyes softened when he recognized her. "It helps. Architecture, sketches, it's the one thing I can't let go of." She sat across from him, studying the rough pencil lines. Arches, skylines, facades of buildings that seemed both grand and fragile. They were beautiful. "You're still an architect," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "Not in this city. Not after what happened." He didn't elaborate, but his hands tightened around the pencil until it snapped. Sophia leaned forward. "Then tell me. Tell me what happened." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, as if debating whether she could bear the weight of his story. Finally, he sighed. "There was a project. A renovation on 54th Street. I raised concerns about the materials, but the investors didn't want delays. Corners were cut. I signed off because I trusted the numbers I was shown. And then the building collapsed. People were hurt. Lawsuits followed. Careers ended." His voice cracked. "And Ethan, my son, he saw the news. He was just a boy. His mother didn't want him around me after that. Said I was dangerous. Said I was a failure. I lost them both that year." Sophia's chest ached. The tragedy wasn't just professional, it was personal devastation. A man broken not only by the city but by the people closest to him. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. "Daniel, you're not the monster they make you out to be." He gave a bitter laugh. "Tell that to Richard Hale. He was one of the investors who pushed the project through. He got out clean. I didn't. Sophia froze. Richard. Her board member. The same man warning her to stay away. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, each one sharper than the last. Richard hadn't just known Daniel, he had been part of the very project that destroyed him. Sophia's blood boiled. He let you take the fall. Daniel's silence was answer enough. Over the next week, Sophia began inviting Daniel into her world in small steps. First, she brought him to her office late at night when the building was empty. She gave him a quiet workspace and paper. He began sketching again, his designs filling pages with brilliance she hadn't seen in years. Then, she asked him to consult on a small internal project, a community space her company had promised to fund but never delivered. His insights were sharp, precise, visionary. He's gifted, she whispered to herself one night as she watched him work under the glow of her office lamps. And he's wasted in the shadows. But not everyone saw it that way. Word began to spread within the company. Whispers in the corridors. Furtive glances in meetings. Her executives questioned why a disgraced architect was walking their halls. And then Richard confronted her directly. Enough, he snapped during a private board session. This obsession with Carter will cost us everything. If you keep bringing him around, investors will pull out. Do you want to watch your empire burn? Sophia didn't answer. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about her empire. She was thinking about Daniel. One night, unable to resist, Sophia went to the shelter again. Daniel wasn't there. A volunteer pointed her to a small, rented room where some men stayed when the beds filled up. She found his door slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room was sparse, a bed, a desk, a few books stacked haphazardly. But what caught her eye was a sketchbook lying open. She stepped closer. The page wasn't filled with buildings this time. It was filled with her. Her profile, her hands, even her smile she rarely allowed the world to see. Dozens of attempts, each one capturing some essence of her she hadn't realized she still possessed. Sophia's throat tightened. Before she could process it, a voice came from behind her. You shouldn't be here. Tell us in the comments, who do you think it was? She spun around. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his eyes shadowed with something between vulnerability and anger. Daniel, she began, her voice trembling. I wanted to check on you. For a long moment, he said nothing. Sophia resolved within her that it is better she leaves. As she exited, Daniel stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Snow fell in delicate swirls outside the tall glass windows of Sophia Reynolds' corner office. Midtown New York was a blur of neon and steel beneath her, but today her attention was fixed on the man across from her. Daniel Carter sat in a chair too small for his presence, his hands clasped, his posture composed yet heavy with an invisible weight. The notebook lay between them. Its sketches, lines of bridges, towers, homes, spoke a language Sophia had learned to read, longing and brilliance mixed with grief. But what had shaken her most was the page with her. Not a polished portrait, but something raw. Her sitting at the bus stop that night, shoulders hunched, exhaustion in her eyes, Daniel's coat wrapped around her. Captured in strokes of graphite was not the CEO the world feared, but the woman behind the mask. Sophia's voice was quiet. Why did you draw me, Daniel? His eyes lifted, steady but vulnerable. Because you reminded me of who I used to be. Before I lost everything. The confession hung in the air. Sophia leaned forward. You didn't just lose everything. You were pushed into the shadows. Daniel hesitated, then exhaled a breath that seemed to carry years of silence. He flashed back to every details of what happened years ago. Daniel had been celebrated as one of New York's most promising architects. His name was attached to projects that reshaped the skyline. But one project, a residential tower in Queens, collapsed during construction, harming 3 workers. Investigations blamed faulty design. Daniel, the lead architect, took the fall. But it wasn't his mistake. It was the contractors cutting corners, Daniel said, voice low. I had proof, but exposing it meant destroying people who weren't ready to be destroyed. My firm begged me to take responsibility. They said I'd recover. But I didn't. My reputation burned overnight. Clients vanished. My wife left. My son, his voice cracked, the words faltering. Ethan didn't want to see me anymore. Sophia's chest tightened. She had heard rumors about that collapse years ago, but never the man behind the headlines. You carried the city's blame, she whispered. He nodded. I thought maybe if I disappeared, if I paid in silence, it would make things right. But silence just swallows you. Sophia turned to the window. Below, the city pulsed with life, blind to the broken man before her. She remembered the first boardroom she'd ever walked into, men twice her age waiting for her to fail. She remembered swallowing her fear, fighting tooth and nail until she was untouchable. But what was the point of all her power if she let injustice stand? The next morning, against her advisor's warnings, Sophia used her company's media influence to release a statement: the Queen's collapse was not Daniel Carter's fault. She backed it with evidence she dug up herself, contracts, safety reports buried years ago. The story spread like wildfire. News outlets rediscovered Daniel, no longer the disgraced ghost but the man who had been wronged. Her board erupted in anger. You're risking your empire for a man who lives in a shelter, one shouted. Sophia only replied, I'd rather risk my empire than lose my soul. Days later, Daniel stood in a quiet Brooklyn cafe, nervously waiting. Sophia had arranged this meeting, and he almost hadn't come. But then the door opened, and a young man walked in, mid-20s, tall, with Daniel's eyes. Ethan, Daniel breathed. His son froze at the sight, years of distance written across his face. But there was no anger, only shock. Dad? Daniel's throat tightened. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I never stopped caring. Silence stretched. Then Ethan stepped closer. I thought you abandoned me. Mom said you chose disgrace over us. Daniel's eyes glistened. I chose silence because I thought it was the only way to protect what little I had left. But I was wrong. For a moment, Ethan simply stared. Then, slowly, he pulled Daniel into an embrace. The cafe blurred into the background as father and son clung to each other, 2 broken lives stitching together in the simplest act of forgiveness. Weeks passed. Daniel no longer slept in the shelter. Sophia had helped him secure small design contracts, nothing glamorous, but enough to start rebuilding. Ethan visited often, eager to learn about the father he had almost lost. One evening, as snow blanketed Central Park, Daniel and Sophia walked together. The city lights shimmered on the icy lake, their reflections fractured yet beautiful. You gave me back my life, Daniel said quietly. Sophia smiled faintly. No. You gave me back mine. They paused at the bench near the bus stop where it had all begun. Sophia touched the sleeve of his worn coat. Funny, isn't it? How something as simple as a coat changes everything. Daniel chuckled softly, his breath misting in the cold. I only gave away my coat. Sophia looked at him, eyes shining. No, Daniel. You gave me hope. The camera of life pulled back, New York glowing, restless, unstoppable. 2 figures sat side by side at a quiet bus stop, not CEO and failure, not savior and saved, but 2 souls who had found redemption in each other's humanity. The city rushed on. But for them, time had slowed, just enough to remember that even in the harshest winter, warmth could still be given, and sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The end. Tell us in the comments, What part of this story touched you the most? For more gripping cinematic stories that will stir your soul, subscribe to Soul Food Stories and turn on your notification button to stay updated.